The knock came at 11:14 on a February night when the forecast had called for 2 inches, and the world outside Owen Marsh's farmhouse had become something else entirely. He had been awake. He was usually awake at 11, the particular wakefulness of a person whose sleep had been reorganized by years of keeping different hours, and had not fully reorganized back. He had been sitting with Pepper at the kitchen table, with a book he was not entirely reading, and the wind doing what northern Michigan wind does in February, which is to make a farmhouse feel both very solid and very small at the same time. Pepper heard it first. She was a 7-year-old Dutch shepherd with a gray muzzle that had come in early, the way it sometimes does with working dogs. And it had given her face from the time she was 4 a quality of settled wisdom that Owen had privately found reassuring, as if her aging ahead of schedule was a form of patience with his own slower arrival at the same state. She was at the door before the second knock, which told Owen the knock was real and not a branch or the wind manufacturing a sound that resembled intention. He opened the door. The woman on the porch was 76 years old and covered in snow in the specific way of someone who has been in it for longer than anyone should be in it. Not a dusting from walking from a car, but a coating, thorough and accumulated. The snow in the folds of her coat and along the brim of her hat and on her eyelashes. The snow of someone who had been walking through a blizzard for a long time before she found a light to walk toward. She said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My car is in a ditch." Pepper stepped past Owen and sat on the porch at the woman's feet and looked up at her with the full, unhurried attention she brought to people she had decided required her presence. And the woman looked down at the dog and something in her face, the tight, controlled expression of someone who has been managing fear in the dark for 2 miles and has just reached the place where managing it is no longer the only option, shifted. "Come in," Owen said. "Please come in right now." What happened in the farmhouse on County Road 571 over the next 6 hours, the kitchen table and the tea and the piano in the back room and the song that Owen had heard hummed since childhood without knowing what it was not a rescue in the way most rescues are described. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was 2 people alone in a blizzard, each of them carrying something they hadn't planned to set down, finding that a storm had made setting it down the only available option. If this kind of story is the kind that stays with you, subscribe. This channel is for exactly these 6 hours. You'll want to be here for what the piano does. Owen had grown up in Kalkaska County and left it at 18 and come back to it at 31. Which was the pattern of a certain kind of person from northern Michigan, the ones for whom the landscape was specific enough to their interior life that other landscapes, however beautiful or interesting, never quite replaced it. He had bought the farmhouse from his grandfather's estate, which was the kind of purchase that was partly financial and partly the acknowledgement of a pull he had been resisting for a decade and had finally stopped resisting. He had served 8 years with the 2nd Marine Division and had come home with both the difficulty and the knowledge that the difficulty was not permanent, which was the most useful thing his therapist had told him, and the thing he had believed least at first and most now. He was 33 years old and lived 3 miles from his nearest neighbor and drove to Kalkaska for groceries twice a week and spent his days on the kind of work that a farmhouse and 40 acres requires, which was constant and various and physical in the ways he needed it to be. He was not lonely. He was careful about the distinction. Lonely was a lack. What he had was a preference for a particular quality of quiet that most social situations did not provide, and the preference was not a wound. It was a choice, made deliberately, with full understanding of what it included and what it cost. He knew the cost. He paid it on the evenings when the quiet went past a certain depth and became something heavier. He had Pepper for those evenings, and she was sufficient. Pepper had been with him for 5 years and had been with someone else before that in circumstances that the rescue organization had described carefully, and that Owen had read carefully, and that had made him feel, in the particular way that things sometimes do, that the dog had been looking for the right kind of quiet for as long as he had. She was not a demanding dog. She did not perform. She moved through the farmhouse with the settled authority of an animal that has found its place and has no remaining questions about whether it will stay. She was 7 years old, and her muzzle was gray, and her eyes were still gold, and she had a habit, in the evenings, of putting her head in Owen's lap and waiting, without apparent purpose, until he put his hand on her head, and then she would stay there until she decided the thing she had come for was complete. He had not had an unexpected guest in 14 months. The last one had been his sister, who had driven up from Grand Rapids for a weekend and had been good company and had left on Sunday, and the quiet after her departure had been, if he was honest, a relief. Which was information about himself he had filed and examined and not yet fully resolved. The woman at the door was the opposite of expected and the opposite of planned, and Pepper had already decided she was staying, which was the whole of Owen's decision-making process for the next several minutes. Nora Belial had been a music teacher for 34 years in the Cedar Lake School District, which was south of where she'd ended up tonight, and she had taught piano and choir and general music to children who had mostly not known they were being given something they would carry for the rest of their lives, which was the nature of gifts given to children, and which she had made her peace with. She was 76 years old and had the upright, particular quality of a woman who had spent 3 decades asking children to sit correctly at a piano bench, and the posture had become simply how she held herself, the way certain professional habits migrate from performance to identity. Her husband, Bernard, had died 2 years ago. He had been a civil engineer and an amateur pianist of genuine, if self-taught ability, which was the combination that had made him, in Nora's view, the most interesting person she had ever met. A man whose work was precision and whose evenings were music, who had built bridges for 40 years and come home every night and sat at the upright piano in their living room and played the things he felt, in the language that felt most accurate for feeling them. She had taught him everything he knew about music theory. He had taught her everything she knew about how to love someone who needed both the bridges and the piano and did not see those things as contradictions. He had served in Korea before any of that, before the bridges and the piano and Nora, at 20, in the 1st Marine Division, in the cold and the specific difficulty of a war that the country had largely declined to discuss in the decades since. He had not talked about Korea much. He had hummed sometimes in the evenings when he was thinking about something else, a particular melody that Nora had learned to recognize over 51 years of marriage, the way you learn to recognize a sound that belongs to a person without being able to name it, just knowing it was his. She had been driving home from her daughter Claire's house in Traverse City, which was 40 minutes south under normal conditions, and had become something else entirely when the snow that was supposed to be 2 inches became a whiteout somewhere on County Road 571. She had not panicked. She had slowed down, and then slowed down further, and then the road had done what roads in blizzards do, which is to stop being clearly a road, and she had gone into the ditch at the kind of speed that produces a stuck car and a shaken driver and no injuries, which was the best possible version of going into a ditch. Her phone had 1 bar, which was enough to call Claire and tell her she was all right and her car was in a ditch and she was going to find a house. And Claire had said, "Mom." And Nora had said, "I'm fine." And Claire had said, Mom and Nora had said she would call when she was somewhere warm, and had gotten out of the car and started walking toward the only light she could see. The light was Owen's kitchen window, 3/4 of a mile away, which had looked closer than it was, and she had been walking for 40 minutes in the dark and the blowing snow when the porch light came on and the door opened. She was not a woman who knocked on strangers' doors. She was a woman who had driven herself to and from every appointment for 51 years of marriage, because Bernard's work schedule was complicated, and her independence was not negotiable. She was a woman who had managed the 2 years since Bernard died, with the careful, organized competence of someone who had always been capable and intended to remain so. She knocked on the stranger's door because the alternative was the dark and the snow and the temperature that was still dropping. And she was 76 years old, and she had been walking for 40 minutes, and the light was on. She said she was sorry to bother him. Pepper sat on the porch at her feet. She did not cry until she was inside, and even then it was brief. 2 minutes at the kitchen table, with her hands around a mug of tea that had appeared without her asking for it. The particular crying of someone who has held something tightly for longer than they realized, and has abruptly reached the place where the holding is over. Owen sat across the table and said nothing, and did not look away, which was what the situation required, and which he understood, without being told. Pepper put her head in Nora's lap and stayed there. They talked for 2 hours before either of them said anything that mattered, which was not unusual, and was in fact the correct order. The roads. The forecast's failure. The specific nature of northern Michigan winter, which was the conversational common ground of anyone in Kalkaska County after February. Claire. And the dinner that had been good, and the pie that Claire made every year that was better than anything Nora could account for, given that she had taught Claire to bake and had never made a pie that good herself. Owen made more tea. Pepper moved from Nora's lap to the floor between their chairs, equidistant, and lay with her chin on her paws and her eyes moving between them in the companionable way of a dog that is monitoring a situation it has decided is going well. It was Nora who asked about the piano. She had seen it through the doorway to the back room when she came in. The upright against the far wall. A good instrument by the look of it, dark wood, older but not neglected. She had noticed it the way musicians notice instruments, involuntarily, the way you notice a particular quality of light. "Do you play?" she said. "My grandmother did," Owen said. "I never learned. It's been there since she died." "How long ago?" 11 years. Nora looked at the doorway. "May I?" Owen looked at her for a moment. He had not had anyone in that room in 14 months. He had not had anyone play that piano in 11 years. The question had the quality of something arriving from outside the ordinary range of what evenings contained, and he had the particular feeling, familiar from the service, unfamiliar since, of a situation moving past the point of the plan. "Yes," he said. "Tell me something in the comments. Have you ever been in the middle of something frightening? A storm, a breakdown, a wrong turn that got very wrong and found unexpected shelter? Not necessarily a building, a person, a kindness you didn't expect. Tell me about it. This section should be full of those." Pepper followed Nora to the back room and sat beside the bench before Nora had settled onto it, which was the positioning of a dog who had decided that whatever was about to happen was worth being adjacent to. Nora sat at the piano. She ran her hands over the keys without pressing them first, the way pianists touch a new instrument before playing it. A greeting, an assessment, an introduction. The keys were slightly yellowed at the edges in the way of old ivory, and the action was stiff from disuse but responsive, the way a good instrument remains responsive even after long silence. The tuning was off in the way of a piano that has been in a Michigan farmhouse through 11 winters and summers without being attended to, but it was not so far off that the music would be unrecognizable. And Nora had been playing out-of-tune instruments since her first year of teaching, when the school's budget had run to ambition before it ran to maintenance. She played quietly. Not performing, she was not in a recital room, and Owen was not an audience. She played the way people play when they are alone with an instrument they trust, which is to say she played towards something rather than for someone, and the something was private, and the playing was the only accurate language for it. Owen stood in the doorway. He did not know what she was playing. He knew that he had heard it before, or something like it, some close relative of this melody, in a different key and a different register. In the evenings of his childhood, when his grandfather sat in the kitchen and hummed while he read the paper. A low, unconscious sound that had been part of the texture of those evenings, the way the smell of coffee and the sound of the furnace had been part of it. He had never known what the humming was. He had not thought to ask. He listened. Nora played through the melody once, simply, without ornamentation. Then she stopped. "What is that?" Owen said. She turned on the bench and looked at him. Something in his face had told her something, and she read it with the attention of a woman who had spent 34 years reading the faces of children to understand what they were hearing. "It's the regimental march," she said. "First Marine Division. Bernard used to play it." She said it simply, as a piece of information. She did not yet know what it meant to him. Owen came and sat in the chair that was near the piano, the one that was there because his grandmother had put it there, so she could turn from the bench to talk without standing up. He sat in it the way he sat in things, without taking up more room than necessary, without performing either comfort or discomfort. "My grandfather hummed it," he said. "My whole childhood. I didn't know what it was." Nora looked at him. "First Marine Division?" she said. "Korea," he said. He never talked about it. "Bernard didn't either," she said. "Not about the hard parts." She looked at the piano keys. He hummed when he was thinking. He hummed when he was in the kitchen doing dishes. He hummed when he was driving, when he thought I was asleep. She paused. "I knew the melody before I knew where it came from. By the time I found out it was a march, it had already become something else. It had become just him." Owen said nothing. Pepper had shifted on the bench to press against Nora's side, the warm weight of a dog that has decided its positioning is correct and sees no reason to revise it. Nora put her hand on the dog's back. "He used to play it when he couldn't sleep," she said. She said it to the piano and to the keys and to the 11 years of silence in this room. I'd lie there and listen and think, as long as I can hear the piano, everything is all right. The farmhouse held the sentence the way it held the blizzard outside, completely, without letting it out. The walls doing what walls are for. Owen looked at his grandmother's piano. He thought about the evenings in his grandfather's kitchen, and the humming, and the way he had never thought to ask what it was, and about the 2 years since he had moved into this house and not once gone into the back room to do anything except retrieve something from the shelf, and about the specific quality of silence that an instrument produces when it has not been played in 11 years, which is not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a room that is waiting. He did not say any of this. He sat in his grandmother's chair, and Nora sat on his grandmother's bench, and Pepper sat between them, and the blizzard went on outside, and the piano had been played for the first time in 11 years, and the melody was one he had known since childhood, without knowing that he knew it, and both of those things were true at the same time. "Would you play it again?" he said. She played it again. The plows came through at 4:30 in the morning. Owen heard them from the kitchen where he had dozed in his chair, Pepper across his feet, Nora asleep in the guest room that he had not used in 14 months, but that had sheets on the bed because his mother had made him put sheets on the bed during her last visit, and he had not taken them off. He made coffee. He called Kalkaska County Road Services about Nora's car, which they said would need a tow in the morning. The road's not yet sufficient for a reliable pull. He called Claire's number, which Nora had written on the notepad by the phone, the landline that Owen kept because the cell coverage 3 miles from the nearest neighbor was a negotiation he had declined to have, and left a message that her mother was safe and warm, and the roads would be clear by morning. Claire called back in 4 minutes. She was from her mother's generation in certain ways, and her own generation in others, and the way she said thank you on the phone to a stranger at 4:45 in the morning was both at once formal and young, and entirely sincere. She said she would come in the morning to get her mother and the car. Nora came to the kitchen at 5 and found the coffee and sat across from Owen, and they were quiet for a while in the way that people are quiet after a long night. Not empty quiet. The full quiet of two people who have been through something together and have arrived on the other side of it and do not need to describe the crossing. At 5:15, headlights came down the drive. Owen had not called anyone. He had not needed to. Donna Krebs, who farmed the land to the north and had been Owen's nearest neighbor for the 2 years he had lived here, had seen the plow go past and had done the arithmetic. A February blizzard, the light in Owen's farmhouse on past midnight, a strange car in the ditch on 571 that the plow had gone around and had driven over with a covered dish of scrambled eggs and a loaf of bread she had baked the previous afternoon. She came in without knocking, which was the prerogative of a neighbor who has established, over 2 years of steady adjacency, that knocking is a formality neither party requires. She looked at Nora. She looked at Owen. She set the dish on the counter and put the bread beside it and said, "Roads are clear enough by 6, and put on her own coffee because she had been up since 4, and Owen's was already half gone. 3 people and a dog in a farmhouse kitchen at 5:15 in the morning in the aftermath of a blizzard that was supposed to be a dusting, eating scrambled eggs and bread and drinking coffee that was not quite strong enough, which Donna fixed by making a second pot. There are mornings that exist outside the ordinary sequence of mornings. The ones that arrive from an unexpected direction and leave you somewhere you didn't plan to be, with people you didn't know the night before, in a kitchen that is warmer than the outside in a way that goes past temperature. Those mornings are not planned and cannot be planned, and the only way to be ready for them is to keep the porch light on and open the door when someone knocks. Owen had kept the porch light on because he always kept the porch light on. He had opened the door because Pepper had gone to it before he did. He had made the tea and shown Nora to the back room and sat in his grandmother's chair while the regimental march came back into a room it had not been in for 11 years. He had not planned any of it. He had been ready for all of it, without knowing that he was. Claire came at 8 with a tow truck behind her. She was in her 40s and had her mother's posture and her father's eyes, and she looked at Owen the way a person looks at the reason they don't need to be frightened anymore. She shook his hand and held it a moment longer than a handshake requires. She looked at Pepper. "She stayed with her all night," Owen said. Claire looked at the dog for a moment. "Good dog," she said. Like she meant the whole of it. Nora stopped in the kitchen doorway before leaving and looked at the room, the dishes, the bread with the heel gone, the coffee mugs, and said, "I want to come back and play that piano properly. When the roads are better." "The piano will be here," Owen said. Pepper went to Nora at the door and sat at her feet, and Nora put her hand on the dog's gray muzzle with the gentleness of someone touching something they intend to remember. Then they were gone. The farmhouse was quiet again. The blizzard had stopped around 3, and the morning was the particular white and blue and gold of northern Michigan after a storm. Owen stood at the kitchen window with his coffee, and Pepper sat at his left shoulder, and the piano in the back room was the same piano it had been for 11 years, and was also in some way that did not require explaining. Not quite the same. Some doors are opened because a dog goes to them first. Some melodies are recognized before they are named. Some nights that begin in a blizzard and a stranger's knock, and end in a farmhouse kitchen with scrambled eggs and a neighbor who didn't need to be called, are not accidents. They are the shape that things sometimes take when the porch light is on and the door is not locked and a person has, without knowing it, been getting ready. Nora came back in April. Owen had called the piano tuner from Kalkaska the week before. She played for 2 hours in the back room while Pepper sat beside the bench and Owen sat in his grandmother's chair, and the regimental march came through the farmhouse the way it had come through his grandfather's kitchen when he was a boy, low and familiar and belonging to the room. He knew what it was now. He had always known it. He had just needed someone to play it where he could hear it. This story is for every person who is 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and keeping the porch light on without knowing exactly why. Keep it on. Someone is walking toward it through the dark. And for anyone who has knocked on a stranger's door because it was the only light, you did the right thing. The right people open those doors. Have you ever found shelter in an unexpected place, a stranger's house, a person you didn't know, a kindness that arrived from outside the ordinary range of your life? Tell me about it in the comments. This section is for those moments. They deserve to be written down somewhere. If this channel is one you want to stay with, subscribe. Every story here is for the people who keep the light on and the people walking toward it. There are more of both. You will want to be here for the next one. What will you carry from this one? Pepper sitting beside Nora on the piano bench, or the regimental march coming back into a room it hadn't been in for 11 years? Tell me in the comments. I'll see you there.